Welcome to the Michigan Golfer Show. Join us each week as we explore the people, the places, and the events that shape our great game.
Hi, I'm Jennie McCafferty for Michigan Golfer, and we're here at Washtenaw Golf Club on a snowy day in January. The kind of day that a Boston weather guy used to say, it's time to get out your red golf balls. And with us is Dave Kendall, a Michigan Golf Hall of Famer who is actually the owner of this club, along with a couple of other people. But Dave has had a really interesting career in golf. You're from Cadillac, and I think of Cadillac and I think of two lakes.
Yeah.
So tell us about growing up and playing golf in Cadillac.
Well, my parents were both from Cadillac, and they grew up there. And I was the fifth of six kids. Although they all dabbled in it, I'm the only one who really played golf. And it was something I did with my mother and father. And Cadillac is a wonderful place. I lived there till I was 9, and then our family moved to Jackson, so just west of Ann Arbor. And but I remember my years in Cadillac. My first exposure to golf was in junior golf at Cadillac Country Club, where we stood in a big circle, and a fella named Orman Bishop, who was the golf professional in those days, that would have been in the early 60s, would take us through some drills and exercises. And then later on, I had no idea I would become the golf professional there some years later, where Mr. Bishop used to stop in, and we would talk about the old days. So I really loved all my years in Cadillac.
Well, then college was pretty interesting. You were one of the early people who went to Ferris State and participated in the golf program there.
Well, yeah, I had gone to Jackson Community College right out of high school, and they had a golf team there, and so that's where I really started thinking about maybe there's a future in golf. And one of my friends there said they were starting this program at Ferris State called Professional Golf Management. And I thought, wow, I could never be good enough to ever be a golf pro. But, so I held, golf pros in high esteem, because in Jackson, Michigan, where I was growing up, every one of the golf pros in the city were just outstanding players. And I thought, wow, if you couldn't be like that, you couldn't make a career in the golf business. So to get in the program, we had to have, I think it was a 6 handicap or an 8 handicap, and I was able to do that. And Norm Bennett, who is the original director of the program, he said, about 50% of you people who are starting this program are going to finish it. And a whole bunch of people took that like he was going to try and get rid of them. And I took it like, well, I'm going to make sure that I'm one of them. And I'm going to work real hard, and I'm going to go to every class. And I made a lot of promises. If I get accepted in this program, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And then when I did get into the program, I remembered all these promises I made about how dedicated I would be and that. And so it really made me do it.
What are some of the things you learned during that program?
Well, it's you're in the School of Business, and it's a marketing degree that you get. So, the understanding of, I wouldn't even know what marketing meant, when I started. But some of the most basic things I never forget are things that I learned in our marketing classes. We had this very tough guy that I had for 3 different classes, Dr. Lucas, legendary guy, how he could get everybody to come to class every time prepared. Because if you didn't, he would embarrass you so bad that you just couldn't take it. So he was a very effective guy. And so I'll never forget him. And I remember so many things because I did work real hard at that. Ferris, you had 4 6-month internships. And the internships, you got to work in the field, in the business. And so getting a start at Disney World for me, it was funny because the hierarchy at Disney World, the golf professional, director, golf, and those general manager, they said, the PGA is going to be looking at us. We got these interns from the PGA school. They don't know what to make of it. Of course, we don't either, because we're just trying to. It was new to everybody. So it was, I think of the people that I met there. I was talking about Mark Russell earlier. He became a big shot on the PGA Tour as a rules official. He was the head of the rules officials who just retired recently. It's fun to see what they become years later when we were kind of irresponsible college kids. And but we all grow up and go on about our careers. And but I'll never forget that. Then I went to a place called Pine Tree Golf Club, and that was my second and fourth internships. And that's where I got to be at a private club. It was a very wonderful place, designed by Dick Wilson. Pine Tree's in Boynton Beach, Florida, just south of West Palm Beach. And a fellow named Bob Ross was the golf professional there. And he really encouraged me. And, I had he and the guy who I worked for in my third internship, Ron LaParle, they both kind of treated me like I was better than I was, and I didn't want to disappoint them, so I'd try real hard. I don't know why. I always had kind of an inferiority complex, so that really helped me. They encouraged me, and I responded to that. And so I wanted to live up to their expectations, so I tried real hard, and it meant a lot to me to be a good player, because Ron LaParle said, you could get a clerk from the department store to be a good merchandiser. But to get people, you got to be a good teacher and player to get people really interested in the game, to make them feel like, to help them become confident at the game. So I wanted to be, and he was right, I wanted to be like people who were like that. Randy Erskine and Lynn Jansen and Ron LaParle, like people like that. I wanted to be like that, and it made me want to be in the golf business.
You met some pretty interesting people there, too. I'm thinking of a Sam Snead story you have.
Well, Sam Snead was a member at Pine Tree, and of course he was still on the tour then. It was before the senior tour started. So he was probably 65 years old when I first went to work there, and I'd never been around a guy who was a great tour player, and you get to see him every day, and I got to watch him hit balls, and I mean, it got to be at least 100 times I would sit there and watch him, and of course he didn't mind. He's used to hitting balls in front of people, so he didn't make him nervous or anything. So but I'd keep quiet and I wouldn't bother him, and he wasn't there for me, but it was nice enough that he didn't kick me out. So and I got to be comfortable around him, and he might send me on an errand to go do something for him, and I was glad to, because he would allow me to sit and watch him. So I felt like that I was winning on that trade. Louise Suggs was another, an LPGA, Hall of Famer, founding member of the Hall of Fame, and one of the founding members of the LPGA Tour. And Miss Suggs, she was just a wonderful golf swing, and I'd get to play golf with her, and she'd say, "David, I'm going to play 9. You want to come along?" And I thought, wow, that would be a treat. And then, or if she'd have guests, another couple, she'd have me come and play. And I thought that was so great. I'll never forget that, because, and she was very encouraging to me. She was a teacher, and she would encourage me. And she'd say, "David, what are you going to do after you get out of college?" I said, "Miss Suggs, I want to be a golf pro." And so once she said that, then she'd help me, and she'd encourage me, and she'd try and help me understand things. And I'll just never be able to forget it. I don't think I would have the confidence to teach if I wouldn't have been around two legendary people like Miss Suggs and Mr. Snead.
So from that, how did you land your job as the assistant pro back in your hometown?
when I worked for Ron, it was my third internship from Ferris. And to be perfectly honest, they had a Ferris State intern who did his first and second internship there, and they loved him.
Oh, okay.
But his third year, they go to school year round. So he couldn't be there that summer, and they got me. A dear friend of mine, Norm Bennett, who is the director of the Ferris program, introduced me to Ron, and he wanted me to go work for Ron. Well, at the end of that summer, I knew Tom. He was a classmate of mine, Tom Frick, and I knew he wanted to come back. So Ron says, what are you going to do next year? I said, well, I'm going to get married in the fall, and then I'm going to move to Florida. Well, now he didn't have to choose between us.
Oh, okay.
So Tom went back to Battle Creek. Okay. So then we had another conversation a few months later, and he says, you don't want to go stay in Florida. You got to come back to Michigan. I said, okay, so where would I go? So now he's going to try and help me. Okay. So in the meantime, I see an employment bulletin from the Michigan PGA about an assistant's job at Cadillac Country Club. Now, I was made note of Cadillac because Ron was the golf pro in Cadillac Country Club right after the war in the mid to late 40s. And he always said he thought that would be a great place to get started in the business. So, I was listening to that. So a fellow named Ron Smock was the golf professional. And it was interesting because he came down to Pine Tree and he interviewed me. And we played golf. And so afterwards he offers me the job. The very next day, I play with one of my heroes, Lynn Jansen, and we meet, and he says, wonder if you'd like to come to Green Ridge and take Gary Robinson's place as my first assistant. I said, well, I met this guy named Ron Smock yesterday, and I told him I'd come to work for him. I think I need to do that. Well, I think if it were today, and I were counseling one of my assistants, I say, why don't you call Ron, you just met him yesterday, and explain to him that you have this opportunity. I think he'd understand. But I didn't think I could do that. I thought I'd be going back on my word. And I think Lynn, we became friends. I think he admired me for it. I think he thought he could understand that, hey, you want to do what you said. So I ended up in Cadillac Country Club. Now, Ron became the general manager there. So in those days, Cadillac Country Club had a clubhouse on the lake, and across the street they had the golf shop. So he needs a guy to look after the golf shop who's an experienced guy, and he made me think I was experienced enough, and he ran the golf, and I freed him up to be able to look after the clubhouse. So it worked great. He had been there the year before. He gets a chance to be the general manager at a club in St. Joseph, Michigan, and so that job as the golf professional opens up after that 1 year, and they offered me the job, and wow, I'm the head professional. I barely out of college, and it was funny because of my association with Bob Ross at Pine Tree. One of his closest friends was the director of education for PGA of America, Dr. Gary Wyron. So my boss says, David, you got this opportunity. You got to tell him you're interested. So I think you should go see Gary up at PGA of America office. So I go up there. He sits me down with the director of education for PGA of America, Henry Thrower, and Gary Wyron, who's this guy who's on the cover of Golf Digest. I'm thinking, I'm at this small club like Cadillac. Wow, these people they want to help me. And Dr. Wyron looks at this letter I wrote to want to accept this job. And he said, David, you're missing one big thing. Oh, really? What's that? He said, you haven't told them why it needs to be you.
Oh, okay.
You told all these things, but you never said anything that, well, you need to hire me. Oh, I'm kind of not that. I would never say that to anyone. but he encouraged me to just put something in there that makes them know that you're really interested and you really want this job and that it needs to be you because you're the only one that could fill it like that.
Love it.
And so, I never forgot that. And I bump into Gary Ryron quite often because he was my friend Bob Ross's closest friend down there. And, we laugh about that.
A minute ago, you mentioned getting married. Tell us about Karen.
Oh my gosh, I might cry when I'd have to introduce her at the meet the staff night at Cadillac Country Club. I would cry and I'd get made fun of all the time. And everybody who knows me know I cry every time. Well, anyways, you kind of get used to it. I say, hey, they're going to have to live with it. But Karen and I worked in the golf shop at Catkey Golf Course at Fair State. She was the departmental secretary to the golf pro there. And my roommate worked in the shop, and he said that we should meet. So anyways, she tells me about when I walked into the shop, and she wants to meet me, and she gives me a big smile. And she thinks I wasn't friendly because I'm bashful around pretty girls, So I was kind of afraid to say anything, and it wasn't because I wasn't friendly. It's because I was bashful.
Didn't know what to say.
Yeah, so she didn't think I was friendly. But we worked together for a while, and anyways, I became a little more, where I could talk with her. And anyways, we go through school together. That was probably our junior year. And then we started dating, and then we left campus on Tuesday. We were married that Saturday. So, and then we spent basically our honeymoon because we were rushing to Florida to get to our jobs because she had a seasonal job as a dental hygienist. She's a dental hygienist. Okay. And so we stayed in Ron LaParle's condos till we could find a place to live. And it's been, 43 years now, and I just couldn't imagine life without her. I can't imagine what our life would be like, because we know all the same things, and I'd be lost. So Karen is. She's the one she's so important in the golf business because golf business takes a lot of your time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Especially, they're talking about lifestyle these days and that you want to get a golf pro a 40-hour work week and that. Well, that didn't exist.
No.
Karen never made me choose. I would, do what I needed to do for my club and do the things that I do, and then I would practice for like 2 hours after work. And she never said I shouldn't be doing that. She said, well, if you don't make it for dinner, you can find it in the refrigerator. And I thought that was okay, and she didn't mind. She said, do what you have to do. You never know what somebody's going to ask. Sure. So, and she was always that way. So I'm so fortunate. She didn't make me choose and make me feel like I was a bad guy because I felt like I had to do my job and I had to try to be good at what I do. And she would encourage me to do that. She always did, and she does to this day.
It's interesting because teaching is a big part of what you've done from early on. And so there's some people we know people who work with you, and I'm thinking of people like Doug Bell and Ian Ziska. Can you tell us about some of the people you've mentored and worked with?
Oh, gosh. When we started, Karen, I told you she was a dental hygienist. She did that most of the time, but the rest of the time she worked in the shop.
So she had 80-hour weeks too.
She was the pro shop manager. Okay. And so now we get there, and I worked with some of the young fellas, and some of them came back, and then Doug was about an 8th grader. And I decided when I went to Cadillac, I'm going to be the head professional. I'm going to start a caddy program. Well, there are a lot of reasons why they don't work, mostly because it's not a wealthy community, and most people, not only are they not going to rent a cart, they aren't going to hire a caddy. So Doug, it dwindled down to about half a dozen we had, and Doug was one of them. So he's in 8th grade. I think about that, and then of course he graduates to be work in the bag room, and he was great at that. And Doug has he just has the best attitude of about anybody I ever met, and his mother and father I'd guarantee you that he's going to learn the right lessons. I'll tell you what, because there's a certain way to be, and that's the way he would learn. And so Doug, you never had to worry about any interaction with anybody because he was such a good person that it's corny. You know what I mean? It's like nobody can be like that as a kid, and he was, would listen to everything you say, and then in those days, I won't forget Doug when he played, he had a pull cart. And in those days, the real players looped their own bag. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just this kind of a snob thing. You know what I mean? It's like nobody can be. Doug learned quite quickly that he's got to get rid of that pull cart, and he's got to get a bag.
Those are for girls, right?
It was like that. So then, Doug, Doug is an outstanding merchandiser, which really was a great compliment to me because I'm no merchandiser. I want to be the starter and ranger, as a golf pro, because I think that's real important, the interaction with your members. I don't want to get stuck behind the counter in there. So Doug, he gets stuck behind the counter, and I'd be the guy out on the first tee. So we complement each other pretty well. So he works, and he went to PGM at Ferris State. Cadillac's pretty close by. And Doug was it was funny to tell a story about Doug. Doug qualifies when he's a senior in high school for state finals, which is quite an accomplishment. Yeah. They hadn't had a lot of kids from Cadillac make it to state finals. He made as an individual. And so Doug says to me, he'll be embarrassed me saying this, he said, I hope my dad doesn't come out and watch because whenever he watches me, I play bad. I said, Doug, I think you should call him up and get him out here right now because he's going to be there. So you better get used to it. Because you're going to tell him not to come? Oh, my gosh, he wants to brag about you, and so you got to welcome him and you got to encourage him. So then he goes on and he goes through Ferris, and he's going to some other internships. Some of them he did with me. And he had experiences like I did with wonderful bosses. Mark, he worked for a fellow named Mark Wood, who was a real prominent teacher, and he got a lot of experience teaching. But I always thought about Doug. Doug has a tremendous skill to be a good player. I always thought, he's kind of not selfish enough. Because, see, he'd give up his golf to do something that helped somebody else at something else. He would give up a round. He would give up, he would always make something else more important. Huh. And it's the person he is. Okay. So he would look at it like he's just thinking of himself. He can't, you kind of, to be able to go off on your own and get away from everybody else in practice. Mm-hmm. I'd do it late at night, so nobody's waiting on me or anything. But anyways, Doug had a lot of skills as a player. And so he's gets through college, and a fella calls me who I had known from Bear Lake. I don't know if you've ever been. You might have been there. It's a place called County Highlands, just north of Manistee in Bear Lake. Well, a fellow named Leonard Cohn was the golf professional there, and he's getting at an age where he's going to retire. And he calls me, and he said, Dave, he asked me, we're thinking of getting a pro, because he was the pro since their whole existence. I said, well, if it was me, is the job open? I mean, you're open? Mm-hmm. Well, I have a fellow I know named Doug Bell who's just ready to be a head professional himself. And so Leonard arranges for an interview with him. So I said, Doug, whatever you do, don't be late. You know, it's like a child. He doesn't need to be told
That's
that.
a way to tell him how important it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Leonard calls me. So I know he's got this interview. Leonard calls me about a half hour after Doug's interview. It was supposed to happen. And he says, so where's Doug? I said, he's not there. You know, I'm thinking, he was late once in a while. There's got to be a good reason. So what happened was, there was this, on this back road you have to take to get from Cadillac to there was a detour. Mm-hmm. And Doug did finally show up, and then about a half hour later, some equipment guy, you know, who golf equipment stuff, he's delivering something. He said, man, I got caught up in this hour-long delay on the road because of this detour. Oh, he wasn't lying.
Okay.
You know, he thought,
Okay.
it's making excuses. So he was so lucky that another guy had the same problem right after him. So anyways, Leonard Cohen meant a lot to Doug because he's the guy who started Manistee National.
Oh.
He left Bear Lake to start Manistee National, and he loved Doug. You know, Doug was everything he would hope. Young guy, you know, has a lot to prove. You know, he's so, just the person he is so unbelievable. First thing he did when he had an opening at Manistee is he hires Doug away from the other place he loves. And and then why is Doug at a wonderful place like American Dunes? Because Doug has, you know, he meets Dan Rooney through Doug's daughter, Hannah. Now, Doug's kids are both children of a fallen hero.
Yes.
And so it's such a unique story. She's raised by a PGA professional, but her dad who raised a lot of money for Folds of Honor. Mm-hmm. But her father was, so Doug introduces Hannah because she got a Folds of Honor scholarship, and usually they come to our PGA meeting and say thank you. But Doug introduces her, and this is Doug's daughter, so he introduces Hannah, and she gets up in front of the podium and she says, this will make me cry. She says, I'm very proud of my father for his service, but I never knew him. I was 3 years old when he was killed, and my brother was 1. He didn't know him either. The only dad I've ever known is my PGA dad, Doug.
What a great way to bring that all together.
Oh my gosh. It was, and Doug said when he was dating Ann, he said, I think that if Ann had everything she ever wanted in this world, it wouldn't be me. And I got to decide whether I can live with that. And he decided he could. And he said, actually, I was the outsider. They're the one that welcomed me.
Okay.
And to their family, to their group. And, you know, he couldn't be. I think they just had their first grandchild. And so anyways, Doug, I mean, every step along the way, Doug had opportunities because of his experience and who he is. So he then, when he was my assistant at Cadillac, one day I'm coming up the walk into the shop, and I see this little kid driving the cart. I said, hey, Doug, who's the little kid driving the cart?
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's my nephew, Ian. He said he's coming to work for us. Oh, really? I thought I'd have something to say about that. But he said, oh, don't worry about it. He's going to do great. I said, well, how old is he, like 8? No, he's just small for his age. He's 12. And so anyways, Ian, I called Doug and Ian the kid brothers that I never had, you know, because, you know, you go through so much together when we're through those years, and, you know, we're trying so hard to do the best we can. I had a philosophy that I would tell all those guys. I said, you know, we're going to be judged by our members who are our bosses, according to the worst thing we do. We got to make sure that's pretty good.
Okay.
You can't have the worst thing you do be very bad. It's got to be good. So you got to be consistent, reliable, and so because we're always so afraid that, if we make a mistake, we might not have a job, and we need this job, and we actually like it there. So anyways, Ian spent his childhood. Of course, Doug actually, between Manistee National and Bear Lake, it was called County Highlands, he was at El Dorado in Cadillac. One of our members developed El Dorado. And Ian worked for both of us because it was both in Cadillac. Okay. Because Doug needed them and I needed them. And so Ian, and he was going to Ferris at the time trying to play on the golf team. Okay. Anyways, Ian was the best player of all of us, so he's a very outstanding player. He's a guy who, you look at him at first glance, you go, and you watch him play, and you go, "Ooh, wow, is he?"
I think he's about the same height that you are.
We argue about that. I think I'd appreciate it if you'd say, "Dave, I think you're a little taller than he is." Of course, he'll never admit it. Of course, I think I'm getting shorter, so he's probably taller than I am.
Well, speaking of players, you've been associated with some really terrific ones. One of the ones I'm thinking about is Henry Doe. Henry played in the finals of the Michigan Open with Allison Falk and Andy Matthews.
Yeah, the Tournament of Champions.
Oh, right, the Tournament of Champions. That was one of the most amazing matches I've ever seen.
That was really something. Do you know? So interesting you said that, because that tournament starts on Monday, and on Saturday of that week was the 100th anniversary of the Cadillac Country Club. Oh. And Henry, it was the first time he ever traveled with me. He's my godson. And we were making a long trip. We were going to be at the 100th anniversary of Cadillac Country Club. And Henry's going to play with my wife, Karen, and my son, Bob, and Ron LaParle. Because Ron was celebrating that 100th anniversary. He was a former golf professional there. And so I always wanted Henry to know Ron, because if I talk about him, he'll say, "Oh, yeah, I knew him." But, there's quite a difference in age there. And Ron was over 90 at the time. Wow. And so that week, then we continue on up to the Tournament of Champions, and it's a big thrill for Henry to qualify for that. He's only 15. And so we play in the first, actually that year, the first round, I was the leader. And I'm on the 16th hole, and they have a leaderboard there. And I noticed that they're taking my name off in the second round, and they're putting Henry's on. Uh-oh. Now, Henry had shot 72 in the first round. I shot 68. But he's going on, I'm going off. And so I get done with my round, and Kevin Helm says to me, "Hey, Dave, did you hear about Henry? Did he shoot 68? Because he was putting him up at 400. "Oh, you didn't hear then. He shot 10 under. He shot 62. They want to see you in the press room." Not because of my golf. Yesterday they wanted to see me because my golf, not because of his golf. And so I go in the press room. So I'm sitting with him. And Tim High is interviewing him. And Tim says, "Henry, tell us about your round." And Henry says, "Well, let's see. I started on 10. I bogeyed 11. And I said, 'Okay, did you birdie 12? I can't remember." Oh, my gosh. Tim's got to bring up his scorecard because he can't remember. Now, he shot 28 on the second 9.
28?
28.
That's unheard of.
Yeah, that's unheard of. So we get all done with the thing. I said, "Henry, you got to work on your interviewing." I said, "No, you got to come up with some interesting things, and you got to remember where you made birdies, and eagles and stuff." And I said, "Now, I think something they'd have been interested in is we played with Matt Harmon." Now, Matt was a Web.com tour player who was an All-American at Michigan State. And I said, "Matt was showing you how to read the greens." He said, "Oh, yeah, I used that all day. I was doing that." "Yeah, that's something you should mention." Yeah. So,
what's he doing now?
Henry works at Hall Financial. He's been mentored by David Hall, who's very experienced in the home mortgage business, and he's become, I think, kind of a right-hand man to David. David once said to me, "Dave, I want to thank you for encouraging Henry to come to work for us. He's an absolute home run." And I hope someday he's sending me checks running my company. Ooh. So anyways, I don't want to hold David to that, but anyway. But Henry's doing well. I keep in touch with him. He spends, of course, he works all the time, so it's hard to get. But at Christmas, he and his girlfriend, Danielle, informed us that he's engaged. Ooh. Henry's engaged to be married. And this is a big thing. He still loves golf. He's a member at Detroit Golf Club.
Oh, okay.
So I think he's doing okay.
Okay, so he's still in the neighborhood.
And I play golf with my son Bob and Henry, and we play either at Washtenaw, Red Run, or Detroit Golf Club, one of the three, because each of them plays at the other, so it's a big thrill for me.
That's quite a trifecta.
Henry can still play. He can really play. And so David was quite a player in his own right. I think he's disappointed that he can't beat Henry. Because David's used to being the best player anywhere, but I think Henry still got a little edge, but I don't know if David would admit it.
Well, Dave, I think in many ways, teaching has been the hallmark of your career. Tell us when you first started thinking about teaching.
In my career, going through internships, and I was an assistant at Battle Creek Country Club, the people who I worked for had a real appreciation for teaching and playing, and they really encouraged that. And they really felt like you should be an example. You should be somebody that in your junior golf program they could look up to and aspire to be like. So you felt like you had a responsibility. That way they encouraged that, and that was really interesting to me. And then I can think of one day I was at Ferris State. The director of education for PGA of America, his name was Dr. Gary Wyron. Gary did a clinic for the students, and it was the first year. So we were all freshmen, all aspiring golf pros. And Dr. Wyron, we didn't have internet in those days. He was on the cover of Golf Digest. And don't think that didn't get the attention to every one of us, because we look at Golf Digest. You know what I mean? We never met anybody who was on the cover of Golf Digest. But Dr. Wyron is, and he's talking to us. So he says, "So who's the biggest slicer in the group here?" Nobody raises their hands, because even if I might have been on the list of, but so nobody's going to admit it. So one guy rats out another guy, and he says, Greg Sanders, he's the biggest slicer in the group. Oh, my gosh, he's mortified. Oh, he's so embarrassed.
Well, that was a mean thing to do.
Yeah, he turned out to be a hero, because he got up, Dr. Warren says, "Come on up here." And he had written an article for Golf Digest that said, "Put the triple whammy on the slice." And he took us through these 3 steps. Greg Sanders got up on the first shot, hit a driver that started out to the right and swept right back into the middle of the fairway. Our eyes get big. We're going, he's never hit a shot like that in his life. Oh my gosh. It made me want to teach golf.
That's interesting.
Because if I could do that for others.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of that one moment.
Huh.
I never thought I could be good enough or knowledgeable enough to do that. But so years later, at the 25th anniversary of the program, they asked me to come and do a clinic with Dr. Wyron.
Wow.
I did his clinic. I don't know if he remembered the one he did for us as freshmen, but I did his clinic. And I think he appreciated it. And
you remember it after.
I never forget it as long as I live. I'll never forget that, because it made such an impression. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be teaching. So Ron, LaParle encouraged that. Bob Ross encouraged teaching and playing. And so when I went to Cadillac Country Club, and I'm getting basically coached by those guys over the years, and I'm starting to be able to apply those things, and I'm teaching more than I ever had time to teach, because I'm the starter, the ranger. I work in the shop, I get the bags out, I run the golf program. I don't really have time, and we don't have a range. I actually teach across the fairway. You know, they used to have shag fields in the old days.
Oh, yeah.
You know, where the caddy would go out and you'd hit balls and the caddy would pick them up. Well, I'd actually give a lesson across the fairway, and when people would come by, you'd just stop and talk. And then when they go by, we'd keep hitting again. And I had to pick up balls about every 2 lessons. I only had about enough balls. I had to go pick them. So, and I'm thinking, you know, someday we're going to think this was kind of goofy that we were doing this, but it's just what we did, and my members were used to it. You know, I taught a lot, and so it was a big part of my life, and, you know, I'm there. Time goes by. I'm 17 years at Cadillac, and, you know, Cadillac Country Club was having some problems with finances and that. And so I thought by leaving, and I had this opportunity to come to Miles of Golf, I thought I was doing them a favor. I don't want them to have to choose between me and their club. I want them to choose their club. So I'm going to have, I felt like, and I don't know if it's true, but I felt like I had a responsibility to them to be grateful for the opportunity they gave me to help them, because I really couldn't afford. You know, I wasn't like I was becoming wealthy. I couldn't afford to work for less. I now have these 2 boys, and, you know, so I wanted to see if a standalone teaching business could be a good business in the right place. You know, you can't just do it anywhere. You can't just put a tent up. Where are you going to do it? Where it attracts people?
Why did you pick this one?
Well, that's where the opportunity was, and I evaluated. Chris Mile was one of my members at Cadillac Country Club. He was the Miller beer distributor early on in my time in Cadillac. And then he turned over his beer distributorship to his brother, and he moved to Ann Arbor. And so he had a brother named Kurt Mile, and Kurt became a very close friend of mine. And then I see this employment bulletin, and I had kept in touch with Chris over the years. And there was an employment bulletin to PGA, and I said, I think I want to apply for this, to be the director of instruction. And so I have this interview with Chris. And I said, Chris, I'd be interested in this job, and we're friends. He said, I think I owe it to ourselves to see who's out there. Well, I didn't want him to hire me because we were friends. I wanted him to hire me because I would be the best one for the job.
Well, I guess they have to look at the competition.
Yeah. And so, I respect him for that. I don't think that I'm going to say you should hire me because we're friends. Yeah. Well, anyways, I said, he knew me in Cadillac. I said, in Cadillac, I kind of became the golf guy. Like if you were a golfer in Cadillac, whether you played our course or not, we'd get to know each other. Mm-hmm. And people would say, go see Dave. He'll help you out, whether it's lessons or clubs. I was a retailer at the time. I had a golf shop. I never really liked retailing. It's a good thing that I don't sell clubs at Miles of Golf. I give lessons. So, because in retailing, you kind of have a responsibility to make a profit.
Yeah.
You kind of owe it to your business. Well, I'd say, you want those clubs? You mean $50 is going to be the difference between you being happy or not? Here's the clubs. Well, that's terrible, retailer. I could make sales, but I didn't make a lot of profit, which is a problem, Yeah. So, anyways, so I said, Chris, I kind of became the golf guy. And I'd like to see if I could do that in Ann Arbor. Now, I think that's the most arrogant statement I ever made in my life. Who would ever think? You know what Chris actually said to me? I think you did it. Huh. I'm not meaning instead of others. I feel like we're all partners in the business, those in golf.
Why would Ann Arbor be a challenge?
Well, it's just so much bigger. And people who are from I mean, to me, Arden Arbor is like West Detroit, as if somebody outstate person. I always thought anything east of Lansing and south of Flint is Detroit, which isn't really the truth. But, I thought, wow, it'd be what a thing. So one thing about it that was, I asked my wife to leave her job. I asked my boys, this has got to work. And somebody, Ken Devine, who was the, executive director of Michigan PGA, was just starting to be, I was a board member during his time. And he says, you mean you're going to go work at a driving range for lessons?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Because people thought if you went to a driving range to teach, you did that because you didn't have a job.
Oh.
It's what a guy does.
So you redefined it.
Yeah, I didn't want to do it. No, see, I wanted to teach. I mean, I wanted it as a career. I want to be a teacher as a career, not just something you do if you didn't have a job and you're forced to do it because you need to, make some money, make a living. No, I and then people say, you still at that range? Yeah, because I haven't got a real job. They're like, no, I never intended to leave it. And I never, it's what I intend to do. And when I gave more lessons than I could give, then we have to get another teacher. But it has to be somebody who would care as much as I do. Like I would send my family. I don't have a teacher that I wouldn't send a family member to. That was always my standard. I want them to be cared for. I want them to work with somebody who cares about what happens. And, it isn't about whatever the lesson fee is or all of that. I mean, we're forced to, if I couldn't make a living teaching, I'd have to go do something else. So we do have to charge for it. But, that was what has driven me. And then here in recent years, if we look at our academy, 4 of our 8 teachers were students of ours, who kind of grew up there. And Paul and I are too old for that. We're there just because we've been there from the beginning. And then a couple others are ones who, Ryan Lenahan spent years trying to become a tour player. And he was an outstanding player, but didn't become a tour player. But, he's just a personality that, he's such a kind-hearted person that he that's a lot of it. It isn't all the X's and O's of the golf swing. It's more, somebody who wants to see people succeed and would do anything, stretch themselves to try and help. So a teacher is a supporting position. It isn't the star. I always think of the top teachers who are kind of the star, and they actually think that they're the reason why their player became a great player. I'd think Henry would have been a real good player without me. I think every one of my students, they would have been good with some direction. They would have been. I just happened to be the one that they chose, and I tried to help see them continue to think and to learn and to evolve and to, again, it isn't their everything. They're great. It's kind of how they think and how they win, and they how to learn to compete and stretch themselves, and they can learn from others. They can actually learn both ways, how to be and how not to be from others. And so now Patrick Wilkes-Krier has taken over my academy as of January 1st this year. Well, as of the 1st of 2023, we're turning over the Kendall Academy of Golf to Patrick. Patrick he probably started taking lessons here right at the beginning. We started in 1997, and Patrick told me he was 13 years old then, probably just entering high school, and so he was here right from the beginning. And then Patrick tried to be a tour player for about 10 years, and I'd say pretty darn successfully, because he certainly learned a lot about player development and became an extraordinary player himself. And he decided he wanted to move back to Ann Arbor, where he grew up, and raise his family here. And I can't think of a better place for him if he wants to do that and be in golf than be here. So I'm kind of excited about the future of the academy, because I think that Patrick will do a better job than I've been able to do, because of, he's at a time in his life when he has the tremendous energy, and he has I think of all the people I've known in golf that I've worked with, that he'd be my number one choice to follow us, and I still like to be around and a part of it, and he's for that, and so I'm happy for him, but I'm also happy for the customers at Kendall Academy, because I think that he'll be able to just pick up where we left off and go further.
Well, Patrick, that's quite an introduction, and talk a little bit about how you first connected with Kendall Golf Academy.
Yeah, I mean, I was a young golfer and wanted to work hard and get better, and this was the obvious place to do that. So I think anyone in my seat was we were practicing here at Miles of Golf, and Dave was the obvious choice to kind of start leading our golf improvement. So I don't remember exactly how it started, but I definitely wound up here.
But I can think of a half a dozen players. One common thread is they always wanted you to be on the course with them. Oh. Hey, can we go play? Because normally we work in the studio.
Yeah. But
Henry would always say, Pops, can we go play? Can we go play? And I'd meet him over at Fox Hills. And they didn't, it wasn't just, where their hand was. They wanted to see how you think and how you work. And those three players, because they were at a time in my life when I was still competing, I was in my 50s, kept me on the course, and I have to work my head off to compete with them. And like Henry, we'd be playing, and he'd say, Pops, I'm too ahead. Oh, so this is a rigged tournament, like we're playing the World Championship? Because to have a real competition, both people have to think it's a competition.
Yeah.
So anyways, he'd always remind me that he was ahead of me. And it would always end up, I would just nip him at the end. Makes him frustrated. Now, Henry should beat me every time. So should Steven. So should Matt Harmon. And now I have a senior at Michigan. Her name's Michaela Schultz.
Yeah.
Michaela, we play. She's like that, too. Oh. Hey, can we go play? And so we compete. I'm slipping a little bit these days. So if I play my absolute best, I can compete with her. But, she has a little easier time than Henry did with me. So anyways, I think that their need to compete and seeing, they would always expect that I'm practicing what I preach. They'd expect that. And I'd feel compelled to do that. And it would make me practice and be prepared. And so it helped me probably more than it helped them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting in that you need talent, you need focus, you need time to practice. But you also need this other thing, which is you've got to be driven, a little bit selfish. So teaching has been a huge part of your life, and you've now gotten to a different phase of it where we're sitting at this beautiful golf course that you now own. How did that happen?
Boy, how about that? There are definite reasons. You work in the business, but I was used to working at a golf course, and when you work at a golf course, you have access to the golf course.
Yeah.
Well, now that I work at a range, wonderful range, but they don't have golf holes. So you need, if you're going to practice, you need a place to play.
Yeah.
And, you work in the business, you might be able to call one of your friends in the business, maybe you can go play. But I don't want to keep having to ask for favors. So I came over to Washtenaw. This is in about 2002. And the golf professional here is Jim Wilson. And I said, and I've known Jim from many times. I said, hey, Jimmy, I was thinking of joining the club, But I wouldn't want you to think that I'm out here trying to get clients, because I'm not really here for that. I just want a real nice place to play, and this, I really would like that. And, I want to see what he thinks, because sometimes a guy comes in, maybe he wouldn't like it. Oh, Dave, he says, you got to join. He said, you got to join. He said, we'll have fun. We'll be able to play after work. And so Jim kind of treated me like an insider. He knew that I joined the club, but, like he trusts me to go out and find a place to play where he's not afraid that I'm going to, make somebody mad because I would do like I would at my own club. And so it was just great, except that at the other places, I didn't have to buy a membership. But so I acquired a love for the place. I loved this place. I enjoyed playing here. I could practice here every day. I could play golf here every day and enjoy it all the time. But now mostly I'd come in the evenings because that's when I have time. It'd be like after 7:30 at night, and at the time the club wasn't doing that well. There's nobody here. So I'm just zipping around. I could play 18 holes in under 2 hours easy.
Oh, wow.
So, and so then over the years, they had, the club failed. They ended up selling to Stanley Berger, and I stayed. Well, they came up with an arrangement. The Berger family, Stephen Berger, arranged that I could have access here, and our teachers could, and so that was real nice. So I was able to have a place to play, and as our other teachers would too. And then I heard that Washtenaw was for sale. And it was, it'd be a dream come true, but it's not something that I'd ever be able to do. I would have thought the place that I could afford to buy wouldn't be the place I'd like to play. So, anyways, so I wouldn't know where to begin in that. I just hear rumors, and there's no way that the connection can happen, but I'm just wish that I'd, win the lottery or something, and then I would do that. Well, anyways, I mentioned it to my son. My son's in finance, and I said, hey, I think Washtenaw is for sale. Wouldn't that be something? I'd like to know more about it. And he said, well, who owns it? He's not too in golf. He wouldn't know. I said, a fellow named Stanley Berger. He said, well, why don't I call him?
Oh.
See, I would never do that. Call him. Well, not like he'd mind, but so he calls us. I said, Stephen runs it, runs Polo Fields, his son Stephen. So I said, so he says, well, why don't I call him? So he calls him, and they start a conversation. He knows what to do. And he says, and Tim told me later after we bought the place, he said, Mr. Berger, Stephen, comes over to me and he says, do you know a guy named Bob Kendall? Well, no, I know a guy named Dave Kendall. And I don't know if they're related. But, because Bob never mentioned that, he's finding out information on my behalf. So, anyways, as it turns out, and so we start this process, and we're interested in Nick Ma. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have done it wanted to do it without Nick because of his background in the food business.
Yeah.
Now, Nick has quite a background in the golf business, but he also has a background in the food business. So Nick was really interested in this, and if it weren't for him, I would have said, well, there's no way I could ever do such a thing. And so Nick is a real important part of this. And then we go a little further with conversations. Bob gets involved. Bob says, Dad, you won't believe how long this is going to take, but just be patient. And then, so we're starting to add up the numbers, and we're starting to find out more about it, and we're negotiating, and this happens over a whole year. And we're always meeting at Bob's office, and he's got all this electronics and that's where we'd meet Stanley Berger and his son Stephen. And so we'd go. So when I left Cadillac, it's because I tried to buy a business in Cadillac. It kind of fell through. I'm left with all the bills. The partner that I was going in business with was a family member. She filed bankruptcy. I'm left with everything. So now I'm not a guy who owes anybody anything, but I'm not wealthy. Now I got all this. That's why it was my incentive to leave Cadillac. One of the things is to, and people thought teaching at a driving range for lessons, you could never make anything that way. Well, I thought it's got the biggest upside I could possibly have for it could be successful at it.
No expense.
So I didn't look at it the way that most people did. You teach at a driving range, they think it's demeaning. I never felt that way. I thought we're specialists. You know, we aren't general practitioners. So anyways, we get this, we go, if this absolutely wouldn't have happened without my son Bob. And then I have our third business partner, Steve Davis. Steve is a childhood friend who, you know, became, his expertise was in the automotive business. And we're looking at this as a business opportunity. And he looks at it and he says, I think it's a good opportunity. I think basically he won't admit it, but I think he just wanted to help me. He won't admit that. He says, oh, no, it's all the business opportunities, why I did it. Well, whatever. It wouldn't have happened without him.
We're at the Washtenaw Golf Club, founded in 1899, and we're with the three brand new owners, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Dave Kendall.
Nick Ma.
Steve Davis.
And we have here three people who have a really wonderful vision of how to make this place welcoming for golfers and diners and people in the community. Let's start with you, Dave.
Well, you know, we feel like if you love golf, you're a friend of ours.
That those of us who live nearby pay a lot of attention to, and that really just tells people that it's been here a while. And Nick, you're in the food business. Tell us a little bit about the plans for the dining room.
So in this place, I have a beautiful catering hall, but does not have a restaurant. So I have a background in the restaurant business, so that's what my plan. My plan is to have nice standalone business, the restaurant here, so that we can welcome everyone. So that's our vision at this point.
And tell us a little bit about what sort of vision you have for it.
Well, my vision is to get tied up with two guys that really know what they're doing, and that's exactly what I've done. David and I go back to high school days in Jackson, and we've known each other through the game of golf for so many years. When this opportunity came up, I just wanted to be a part of it.
So have you played this course before?
I certainly have. I was born and raised, as I said, in Jackson. I went to school in Ann Arbor, so I played here many times. It's a lovely golf course, kind of an old historic place. I think it's going to be a great track.
What are some of the things that you find especially appealing about playing here?
The greens are great. Get them fast and firm. They're great, and it has character.
So there's no way I could have done it on my own. My son, I needed my son Bob, Nick, and Steve, and all of those things have fallen into place. And then there's a fourth one. Because of what happened when I left Cadillac, you know, I got left with all the bills. My wife, you know what she said at that time? Devastated us financially. She says, what do we need that we don't have? She didn't say, you dummy, look at the harm you did to us. She said, what do we need that we don't have? We have everything. We should be so grateful. Well, that made me feel like, make me feel grateful. So this time I decide there's no way I'm going to risk our future. I'm doing okay. I have my academy, and I like my academy. So I'm going to pull out. And I say to the Burgers, we're pulling out. They said, you're the people who should own it. Would you meet us again to see how we can make this work? Ooh. And in the meantime, Karen hands me a check. She went and got a loan from her retirement account so that I have enough to do it. So not only was she against, she said, you've been waiting your whole life for this. You have to do it. You have to do it.
Thank you, Karen.
Because I didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't want to put her at risk. So, but that's the way she's always been. But see, because of that, I should be grateful. And I just say, hey, can't you call, you have your academy, you're probably going to have to grind out lessons for the next 20 years, and I'm having a little energy problem. I wear out about noon these days. I used to work all day and then practice for 2 hours. So my game has slipped maybe a little bit because of that. I won't want to admit its age.
This place has stayed essentially the same in terms of the golf course, and it's known as a golfer's golf course.
Yeah.
Why is that?
It's a place you never get tired of, and it challenges you every day. It's harder than the scorecard says it should be, so you're always thinking, oh, I should have been able to get that. Well, then we brought in Ray Hearn because I don't want to think because I know a little bit about golf that I should make decisions about this historic place, so I run everything by him. He's a historian. And we are making changes to the golf course because the golf course needs to be managed. Trees get huge and they die, and
a dozen of them over there.
Yeah. It's because actually, when I talked to Ray, the original architect wanted these angles in these playing lines, and they don't exist because of the trees have imposed. They get big over 50 years and 100 years. They get so big that they need to be managed. And so you're not doing wrong when you manage them. I asked, I wondered, how many trees do we have at Washtenaw? And I figured the only way I'm going to get the answer is to go out and count them. So I did. It's 1,298. Well, now it's much less than that because it's about 250 less than that.
Oh, wow, okay.
That's what's happened over these years. But every one of them, it isn't like we don't look at it. Some are diseased, which, we had big oaks that have oak wilt. And they say if you don't take those trees, every one of them will have oak wilt. And they'll all die. So you have a responsibility to, even though you don't, certain ones you don't, but you must.
Who is it that knows that about an oak tree?
Mark Pappas, our agronomist.
Okay.
He's the one that told me that, and then I verified it.
Okay.
There's, we hired a logger who values the wood, or actually we couldn't afford it if you weren't working with somebody who values the wood, who wants. Now, they don't value all the wood, so they charge you for the ones they don't want, and then they pay you for the ones they want.
Okay.
And so, we're paying them way more than they're paying us. So, but then now it's playability. It's also turf, because if you have a canopy, you get a canopy of roots, and you can't grow grass.
Right.
So you got to balance it.
Yeah.
We want trees. Trees will always be a big part of what Washtenaw is. We're not clear-cutting trees. That's kind of a trend right now. So we're trying to get so that every tree that's out there, there's a reason for it to be. Sometimes it's just a nice tree. It's painful on the 11th hole. We've got a big, beautiful, beautiful tree. It's so in the wrong place that it's going to have to be eventually taken, because there's no grass underneath it, and it's imposing on the green. And it's just going to get bigger. And so we should think, wherever a tree is, what's it going to be in 40 years from now? We should actually make the job easier for the people who are here 40 years from now. I hope, my wife says maybe I will be.
How did you decide on Ray Hearn, too?
I got to know Ray early on when I first started our academy. In those days, you didn't have, I didn't know about texting and that kind of thing. So a person has to call you to make a lesson, and then you call them back. So I got this message from Ray Hearn, and and I call him back, and I get a recorder, and it says Ray Hearn Golf Associates. So we get hooked up. He comes in. I said, Ray, you're in the golf business. What do you do? Oh, my gosh, long pause. I'm a golf course architect. I said, oh, gee, I think I just insulted you. I should know that. I'm in the golf business. I should know, because he's kind of prominent. But that's how clueless I am. Well, we overcame that, and we became friends. Anyways, his office was in Plymouth. He was just starting. Okay. Now it's in Holland. But we kind of, he took lessons for a couple of years, and we kind of kept in contact. If he sees something that I might be interested in, he would forward it to me, and I'd do the same for him. Like if I saw he got some award on something, I would forward it to him. And so when we bought Washtenaw, I was thinking, and I was researching who the original architect was here, and his name came up on Google. And I know he wasn't the original architect, but and so I see that he did a long-range plan for the club in somewhere around 1990, I think, or maybe it was in the 90s. And anyways, so it was late at night. I sent him an email and said, Ray, we've purchased Washtenaw, and I was trying to research the original architect. Your name came up, but do you know, I know you did a long-range plan. Do you know who that is? Within 5 minutes, he sends back and he said, Dave, congratulations on owning Washtenaw. He said, I think it's one of the, we'll call it, it's a jewel that has never really been truly appreciated. And so, that made me feel good. Yeah. And he said, I did do a long-range plan, but they weren't interested in it because I wanted to celebrate in its history, and they wanted to modernize it. Uh-oh. Oh, I want the history. I want to celebrate in the history, so I'm more on Ray's side on that one. Yeah. And so I wondered his thoughts. He said, I did all this work, now everything's digitized and that, but he said, I got all the drawings and stuff. I'll share anything with you. And he said, and when you get a chance to work on a golf course that's pre-1900, you just do it. So we can have some fun. It's the best money we ever spent, I think, getting involved with Ray. And I really appreciate his opinion, but he's not offended if you, say, hey, Ray, I was thinking about this. What do you think? He doesn't act like, well, I'm the architect around here. He's not like that. He values your opinion. He actually wants to know, what would you like this to be? The biggest thing was, he said, Dave, did you notice that the landform on about, I don't know if it's about 6 or 8 of the holes is square? Now, the greens aren't square because they become rounded over the years, but if you look at the landform, if you look at the back of number 1, the back of 11, 10, a little bit, on 12, 7, 4 a little bit, but not quite. They kind of go like this in the back. So he said, now originally these greens would have been square, and I want to find those edges, the original lines, because over the years they used to use walking mowers. Yeah. Well, now they use triplex mowers, and they just become rounded because it's easier. But we're actually starting to carve out those corners.
No kidding.
And it looks cool. I mean, it's just something that you can't turn a 1980 golf course into a 1899 golf course. He said that's just unique to that time, and we shouldn't try and redo that. We should celebrate it. I think we're celebrating the original architect when we maintain it the way they would have. And it doesn't do any harm to the playability. I think it looks cool. A little more effort on the superintendent's part because he has to make those turns. So actually, he showed me how to do it. You go like this, and then you rope around. And Mark, our superintendent, Mark Pappas, has been all about doing this and helping. Instead of saying, well, don't you think I know how to maintain a golf course? He said, he's all about it. He says, I'd like to do it. I think this is fun. He says it's rejuvenated his career. And so I think people will notice it over time. And it isn't all 18 holes. Because the golf course evolved. It was became a 9-hole course, and then it became 18 in the 20s. This will be a place that is unique because of that history, and that we celebrate that history. It'll be a place that people want to play. We continue to try and make, care about the playability. We want, and the maintenance. I know it's a public golf course, and they act like, well, it's a public golf course. They aren't going to maintain it like a country club. Oh, really? Why wouldn't we? Isn't it to our advantage to attract people? I think it is.
Well,
and we aren't going to get it with snob appeal. I mean, that's kind of used to work, but I don't think it works anymore.
Well, history includes tournaments in the 40s and 50s where really famous people played. Al Watrous and who are some of the others? Burton Smith.
Yeah.
Chuck Coaches was low amateur.
Yeah.
How about that? So anyway, there's other tournaments and things like that.
I think Walter Berkamo.
Oh, wow.
And there's another. But anyway, how about that? We should celebrate that. We should remember that. Mm-hmm. I would like to have a room. A fellow named Jeff Ream, we all know James Pyatt won the Michigan Amateur. Yeah. But he won a national junior championship. Jeff Ream did, who was from Ypsilanti and grew up at this club. Oh. His brother Frank, Jeff passed a few years ago, but his brother Frank means something to him that he would be remembered. He brought me a picture telling about that. I want to hang it. I want to have a room that celebrates our history.
One of the J-War brothers won a tournament here.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, isn't that cool?
You bet. Yeah.
There were like five of them, and they were all pros.
I knew all of them. They were, Frank was president of Michigan PGA, and I was on the board when he served. And then there's Cass and Chet and Stan and John. John was a member here. So they were all very prominent in the golf business.
What a jewel you have here. That is the perfect word for it, isn't it?
Well, I hope that we'll be feel like that we positively contributed to its legacy when it's all said and done, many years from now, that we did no harm and that we helped.
When you're playing, can you turn off your owner hat?
It's challenging, but I'm always looking. Where are those tees? Where are the pins? That kind of thing. I want them to know that our people who are making those decisions are experts in the field, and I'm not a micromanager. I never have been in my career. I trust them to know what they need to do. Now, if they don't, I might mention it. I won't mention it every time, but they're going to know that I do care and that I'm watching. Because Tim will come around and he says, Dave, how are those pins? You really want to know? Or are you just hoping I'll say everything's great? But I'll tell you. So, and he doesn't like it when I come around and I say, that pin on 8, that's the most challenging one because the green is so slopey. You can put it in places that will ruin a person's round, and that's our fault. It wasn't the player's fault. It shouldn't be there. And anybody who knows better wouldn't have it there.
Well, you have a reason. So.
So we need to do our part. When somebody comes here, it might be the first day they ever came here. And they have to know that we care about it and they won't find an irresponsible pin because the greens are fast. They're faster than our players, and that makes it harder. you don't have as many pins. You can't put it on quite as much of a slope because the ball won't stay. So if you put a ball up and it rolls back, you don't want to apologize for that. It shouldn't happen. You should know better.
So, Dave, it seems to me as though you had a dream job, and you have a team here. Who are some of the people who are part of your dream team?
Tim Chernowski. I used to just call him Tim C, because, anyways, didn't know how to spell it. He's our general manager. Okay. And Tim makes this place a family. He makes everybody accountable, but he kind of is an advocate for every one of them. I mean, I'd love to work for Tim. I would. It'd be a dream to have a. Now, it isn't like, he's patting you on the back all day. If you make a mistake, he's going to call you on it, and that's what he should do. And I never minded if I made a mistake and my coach had to reprimand me. The way to avoid it is to not make the mistake, and that was fair. He didn't just pick out things. And Tim is a great coach that way, but he's so positive, and I think that people enjoy working for him. And Donna Hatch. Donna is, she's just great. She is our salesperson, but she's also the conscience of the place. If we're in a meeting and it's something somebody's thinking, but they'll be afraid to say it, she'll say it. And every organization needs that. Right. Somebody who makes us, practice what you preach, make sure you're doing what you represent yourself as doing. And, it's fun to listen to Donna and Tim. They sound like a married couple. But it's just, they have this heart and soul, and, they're just great. Zach Swara, our PGA professional, he's just a kind-hearted person who has an easy time getting along with people, because he's just a kind, friendly person. But he does know he has a responsibility to make sure things work. And but in his own way, he has a way of being able to get his point across without making somebody feel terrible. So, and Zach is a talented guy, and he's a people person. And so we love Zach. His assistant, Matt's like that. They complement each other very well. They cover for each other. And then Ryan Pfeiffer, our food and beverage manager, he's a guy who's so used to working weddings, banquets, and outings late at night, so there are ones that, like Zach, would be here really early, but, he's got family, he has responsibilities with his kids and that. Well, those two guys could cover for each other great, because Ryan could be here till midnight, which wouldn't work that well for Zach. But, we find he's comfortable doing that. And if you didn't have people who complement each other, they don't all have to be the same person. They have to their skills have to complement each other. It just wouldn't be the place it is. We have a small staff, and everybody has to, chip in, and we couldn't live without them. If they weren't here to do their job, we would fail.
Who's your superintendent?
Oh, Mark Pappas. Mark he's an outstanding guy. He loves those greens firm and fast, which I love. And again, I was saying that about our mowing angles and that kind of thing, is he's been so willing to listen, and he'll go out there with Ray, and Ray, Ray's he has a degree in agronomy too. He's not, and they speak each other's language. And Mark isn't offended by guidance. He'd like to have it the way you'd like to have it. Now he has his feelings about, how to maintain a golf course, and so it works real well. He's open to suggestion. If you have something he'll take a look at it and tell us why or why not. That's what I want to know. There might be a good reason why we can't do something a certain way, that it can't be done that way and grow grass. Well, he'll look at it. And so his attitude toward all the things that we're trying to do has been fabulous. So we love Mark.
it seems as though you have all these positive people,
Yeah.
and it's got to be an absolutely positive place to come play.
You know, I'd like to think so. We hope it's that way. I guess we leave it to everybody has the right to their own opinion. We hope it's that way. We can't tell people how to think, but we can do our best to, you know, I mean, things happen, and, you know, somebody blames you for the fact that it rained or something. I mean, I don't think there's any answer to that. But, you know, we wish that it was sunny,
We
but
sell rain gear in the shop.
yeah, we can help. You know, we have our chef Dave he's been great. His attitude is so great toward, you know, doing what's ever necessary, or, you know, he'll help. He has an area of expertise, but he's has courage enough to try things and take some chances, and you know, we'd encourage him to do it, and he's become a very valuable part of the team. That and it is a team. I think we were the outsiders, the new owners, because most of them were here when we came.
Okay.
But they've kind of allowed us to become part of the team. They felt a little bit like they were on their own, and like, you know, they were here, but, you know, they didn't really care about them. This wasn't their main area of concern, this golf course, and so I think now they know that it's the only one we have, and it's and it's, you know, but they don't make me feel like they don't value the fact that I'm here, because I'm here about every day, and but I get away enough, and I'm not typically a micromanager. So now if they ask me a question, I'm going to tell them what I think, and but I do respect that they have an expertise, and there's a reason why we would have hired them. It's because they provide something that we're incapable of providing.
Dave, it sounds like you're having fun.
This is the most fun I've ever had in my life. It really is. It is a dream come true. Just like my wife said. She said, this is, you know, you've been waiting for this your whole life. And so I love coming here.